Hi, everyone, and welcome this Friday night to Conversations with Kate. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm so glad that you've joined me and Omar Brownson, who is a member of our congregation and also someone who's been just come to the end of a second wonderful series with us on gratitude. And he's with us tonight. And we're going to unpack gratitude. We're going to talk about his journey toward gratitude and talk about some spiritual practices. There's lots coming up. But first, welcome, Omar.
Thank you so much, Reverend Kate, for having me here.
I'm jealous because I don't have earphones. You look so much more professional than I do. I just have a dog. It looks very good. Well, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. It's great. And I know that some of our parishioners have figured out that you are this sort of gratitude guru in the community, and you have an app, and you're teaching people ways of becoming more grateful. But other members of the St. James community might not know this at all. So I'm so happy that they are meeting you tonight, and I hope that if you are watching, you'll join us in the chat and share questions and comments as we go along. So again, welcome, Omar.
Thank you.
So one of the first times that I heard about your life and your work was there was an article in Oprah magazine, and it was about the beginning of your gratitude journey. So I guess that means you were not born a gratitude guru. Is that correct?
It was a journey.
It was a journey.
Yes.
And so I think as a child, it wasn't something that was sort of constantly on your mind at all, right? It was more when I think you had an experience on a silent retreat. Is that right?
Yeah, 6 years ago, I went on a silent retreat, which was the first time I'd ever done anything like that. And after 6 days of silence, I got to talk to this monk and shared with him. I didn't have any amazing epiphany in all of that silence, but what I felt was a tremendous amount of impatience. And that's when he put his hand on my shoulder and got his face right up to mine and just started laughing at me. And
Wait, he's laughing at you for being impatient?
yeah, he said that the root word for impatience in Latin is patis, which means to suffer. And so he said, "That's your burden to carry." And I'm like, okay. And that's really sort of that inquiry of how do I not suffer? That's really what then put me on a new path.
So what does it mean, or what does it feel like to be suffering with impatience? Like how did that characterize itself in your life
It
back
was
then?
for ambition, and I spent my career in finance and real estate, and at the time I was founding executive director of the nonprofit River LA and working on one of the largest green infrastructure projects in the country with the most famous architect in the world. So it was definitely, being an impatient human being was great for cutting red tape, great for trying to like organize at a large scale.
Mm-hmm.
It was not great as a father, as a husband, as a human being. And that's really where that fundamental conflict, I realized like I needed to kind of pick that it wasn't, going to serve me in the long run to be impatient as a human being, as opposed to a human doing.
A human being versus a human doing. So were you always on the phone or thinking about 5 things at once? That kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, the LA River is 51 miles. It cuts through 17 different cities, counties, state, federal jurisdictions. It's at the intersection of environmental issues, big infrastructure, politics. Was insane. And so, you're trying to do, and infrastructure is also just one of those challenging things because you're really trying to imagine the future 20 years from now. And people are at the same time have needs now. And so part of what you're having to try to do is convince people to make investments that they're really not going to get the benefit of, that it's actually
Mhm.
for another generation. And so that's
Mm.
tension of time, essentially, is the conflict. And that's what is at the heart of impatience, is you're having a conflict with time.
Mm.
You're trying to sell a vision of what's possible, and for those people who aren't going to get the benefit of it immediately.
Well, it strikes me as I listen to you talk that prophets have to be impatient because they're always seeing, this way that we can be, but that makes them really, I would think, not so much fun to spend time with. And I also think when it comes to small children, and your kids were younger then, it's sometimes time moves slowly, like the putting on the shoes and there's it's kind of like slow motion.
There's a when I was my kids at the time were 4 and 6 years old, and so they're just at the beginning of preschool and elementary school. And I remember one of the principals telling us that the days are long, but the years are short. And
Yes.
that
Yes.
that's also sort of this conflict, right? Is that you're exhausted in the day, and yet the years can fly by. And so part of it is, after taking that pause on that silent retreat, was
Mhm.
where do I want to spend my time? And
Yeah.
uh, is it better for me to have a good relationship with my children, my wife, or to get a ambitious, civic project uh, moving forward? And I think at the end of the day,
Mhm.
I left for LA. Um,
Was it
to
hard to leave?
That was very hard to leave, and I was the founding executive director, and so I really built it. And I was working with the architect Frank Gehry, who is obviously a design genius, but also just an incredible human being.
Mhm.
I love the guy,
Mhm.
and telling him that I needed to go do something else was really hard because I actually invited him into the process. And so, uh, I certainly felt a tremendous amount of responsibility. But at the end of the day, there's this Leo Tolstoy quote that everybody wants to change the world, nobody wants to change themselves. And I realized that I needed to really be who I wanted to become in the world, as opposed to try to shape the world. And that, was really born out of growing up here in LA during the 92 riots, being a
Mhm.
high school, and
Mhm.
realizing that our city, our democracy are these very fragile things. And so I went into finance and real estate because I wanted to literally build the world I want to live in. And
Mhm.
for almost 20 years, realizing that it's actually, for me at least, it was more important who I want to be in the world, as opposed to trying to change the world.
I think I hope it's not entirely an either or, right? Obviously, but it's where you're emphasizing the work, right? And I think that it's incredibly powerful for us to live in a certain way, and model what we value in the way that we live. And I want to get back to that silent retreat because you said this interesting word. You said that those 6 days of silence were like a pause in your life. And I'm wondering, would you have discovered what you discovered about yourself if you hadn't paused?
I probably would have had to discover it in a much more painful way.
Mhm.
And I think the pause just allowed me to really take a moment to see what was important.
Mhm.
Because otherwise, I think, and this is particularly acute in the nonprofit sector, but people burn out. And I think it's not just in the nonprofit sector, but any sort of group of folks who are in the business of serving or providing.
Mhm.
It's really easy to prioritize the needs of everyone else. And I absolutely agree with you that, and this is what I love about gratitude, is that it is at that intersection of your self-care and your relationships. And, I think part of the challenge is if you're an activist, you want to go change the world. And
Yeah.
usually you don't actually take time to take care of yourself. And then there's another group of people who are really good about taking care of themselves and no one else. And so to me, I think it is that intersectionality
Mm.
between we having to take care of ourselves because we need to model what we want in the world, and that we actually have a responsibility uh, to the world. I mean, to this planet, we only have one of them as far
Yeah.
as. uh,
So this pause is what brought it about, and culturally, we're in another pause right now. So many people, especially people 65 and older, have had to pause their lives to the extent that they scarcely leave their homes. Other people have started working from home or just going into work a little bit. So there are so many people, and children have had to um, do schooling from home. So many of us, not all of us, not essential workers, but so many of us are in this pause. And it's brought on by a, a horrific crisis, the pandemic, and and here we find ourselves, so many of us, um, in this space where we're with our families, 24/7, where we're on our own. We're in silent retreats, right? So many times. Um, and so I'm wondering, um, can you say what do you make of this time that we're in right now, from where you sit in thinking about gratitude?
This is very disruptive, obviously. And I think, but part of the disruption is this move from what I call efficiency to resiliency, right? So before
Mhm.
COVID-19, it was how fast can we go from A to B? And
Mhm.
now we don't know what B will be. And so we actually have to just stay in this pocket of A. And the ability to stay in that of uncertainty is really about resiliency, which is about the ability to adapt to change and change that you don't expect. The only
So we
way,
have no idea. We have no idea what our world is going to look like next month or next year, do we?
and frankly, the more that we project what we think will happen, if it doesn't happen, then we actually create our own sort of challenges and suffering, because then our expectations are not being met and then people are frustrated. I just saw a chart today that showed the curve of Europe, which did the sort of big up and then down. Whereas here in the US, it's up and it's kind of just staying up because
Mm.
we set these expectations that somehow our economy was going to open fast, right? And that, what is
We'd
fast?
get our lives back.
Right. And so that our lives is about efficiency. And the irony, it wasn't as if everybody was happy before. Like people
Mhm.
probably were like, oh, I'm in traffic, I'm unhappy, going to a job that I may not like, and then I'm too tired at home to really appreciate who I'm with. And so this is the
Mhm.
irony of it, is that people have spent so much time not happy. And this is, statistically, unhappiness was at an all-time high even before COVID-19, in addition to loneliness. And so
Mhm.
our
Before.
absolutely. And so we were already like, and loneliness has the same negative health impact as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And it's a significant number of people in the United States felt that sense of isolation. Um, and so part of, again, gratitude is being this social emotion where it is about not just yourself, but yourself in relationship to others.
Mhm.
Uh, that I think it was so important to really develop this as a practice.
Mm. So people were unhappy and lonely before when they were out and about and everyone we were all living our lives. And what do you think's happening now?
I think we're
In
having to confront those things in a very different way. In some ways, um, the idea of mental health, I think, has been normalized. That because everybody
Mm,
had to sort of deal with some sort of issue of mental health, um, and and I think that is ultimately a good thing, uh,
mhm,
because it's not what we talk about very often. Like emotions are not
mm.
we help people do, and as a man, emotional intelligence was not anything I was ever tested on, right?
That was not on the curriculum.
And I think there's a generational change. Fortunately, both my daughters have mindfulness taught in their schools, and so
Really?
it's part of what's called a growth mindset. This idea that we can adapt and evolve and persevere in the face of challenges and uncertainty. And so I think there is a cultural shift, but it's new.
So this idea of mental health getting normalized, I've heard um, that therapists are being swamped by new patients, and also I think that being able to go to a therapist online is a nice sort of easy entry point for people who might never have been to therapy before. So yeah, that sounds like a huge blessing, really.
And you just said my favorite word, blessings. Uh,
Blessing.
it's German in its root, Blotham, which means to sacrifice with blood. And so when we say that we're blessed,
What? I
really
didn't know that.
doing is acknowledging the sacrifices of others. And that's, so I'm wearing, prayer beads.
Uh-huh.
And, this is like the original wearable technology. For thousands of years, people have literally been counting their blessings. And science is now sort of catching up to what spirituality has long known, is that when you give thanks, you feel better. And
Mhm.
neuroscience now supports it. And that's all this was. The word bead actually means prayer in Old English. And so
Mm.
doing- by carrying these prayers, we're sort of acknowledging that we're connected to something bigger than ourselves, and we're just creating a healthy habit. That's all this is really a healthy habit.
You do that? Do you trace the shapes of the beads and give thanks?
I do it sometimes. I use it more as a reminder. And that's,
Mhm.
again, on the sort of science side of it, is that any habit needs a reminder, a routine, and a reward. And so when we can give ourselves a reminder, which the
Mhm.
physical sort of wearing of
Mhm.
prayer beads, mala beads, rosary beads, worry beads, everybody has them. And I think that's what's also interesting, is that they're
Mhm.
cultural, and they've
Yeah, they are. Every culture discovered this, didn't it?
and then it gives you a simple routine, like, and what's a mantra or an affirmation, or any way to sort of say, okay, what is my intention? How do I want to express that intention? And then the reward is actually a healthier you. Um,
Mhm.
so it actually doesn't take a lot for us to pause and to see the good, but
Mhm.
we don't. Um,
We just don't. I've always wondered about that habit part of it because you know, um, you know how everybody joins the gym, but a lot of people never go to the gym, even though when they go, they feel really good. And church is the same way. I know we can't go now physically at the moment, but everybody, everybody who has a church I think they love their church and they feel better when they go, but there's something that that holds us back sometimes, even from seeking out the thing that we know is going to make us feel good.
The challenge is that we really like comfort as human beings.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, we talked about this earlier, is that when you're seeking comfort, you're coming at it from a place of consuming versus creating. Creating actually takes energy and
Yeah.
agency. And it's a lot easier to just say, "Hey, I want this delivered to me," as opposed to, and it's this JFK, ask not what,
Mm-hmm.
for you, ask what you can do for the country. And, as human beings, it's an act of agency to say that I want to feel better and I am going to do something about it. We talked about gratitude not being an obligation, but an opportunity. And I think that's also part of that change in perspective.
Yeah, we were talking about that before you all joined us. You know how so many families at the Thanksgiving table, some well-meaning adult will say, before we eat, let's all go around the table and say one thing we're grateful for, and then invariably, some people stumble, some people say something really corny. A lot of people say, "Oh, you stole mine," like there's a limited number of things we can be grateful for. But in moments like that, expressing gratitude feels, I think, like a duty. Like we sure ought to be grateful, or it would be shabby of us not to be grateful given all of our blessings, or that whole "there but for the grace of God go I," which is really almost celebrating your good fortune as opposed to really being grateful. And so all the things that I just described, I think are things, are culturally things that we say around gratitude. And I guess I'm hearing you say, and I would agree, let's get rid of all of that kind of thinking. I'm going to say that even the word gratitude, it sounds like a not fun duty, and I want you to just open it up for us. What does it mean to be grateful? It sounds like almost like a dutiful thing to do, to be grateful, but gratitude has absolutely, it's revolutionized your life.
Absolutely.
And so, and you hear stories about Buddhist monks who are grateful in the final hours or moments of their life when they were being it's something that can happen in any life at any time, right? So let's unpack it.
So after that silent retreat and realizing that I wanted to put my attention into my life in a different way, I started to meditate. I meditated twice a day, every day for 6 months. And at the end of it, I realized I was even more stressed out than I was before,
Oh
because
no.
now I had additional 40 minutes that I was trying to accommodate into my day. And then came across mindfulness. And
Hmm.
mindfulness is defined as just the simple act of noticing change.
The
And
simple act of noticing change.
And by noticing change, you become more present. So you're not distracted by what was, you're not worried about what will be, you're just in the moment. And again, part of that is it's an active behavior, because as the brain is designed to get to comfort, and comfort is about familiarity, and familiarity is not a sort of an active awareness. But there's this Asaro tribal saying that knowledge is just a rumor until it's felt in the bones. And
Hmm. I
someone
like that.
of gratitude and felt it in my bones. And I think partly why it made a difference is because gratitude's an actual emotion. It's not some construct that we've created that sort of says like, hey, you should follow this way of being in the world. We literally are wired from the moment we're born with the emotion of gratitude. And so what we're really doing is bringing awareness to this feeling that we actually already have. And,
A feeling of thanks.
Well, so part of what gratitude does and the way that we define gratitude is around making good visible. Because what
Making, okay, everybody, did you get that? Making good visible. That's really interesting. So
because
if we don't make it visible, it's fleeting, and then we lose that moment, right?
we're not paying attention. And where our attention goes our sort of attention, right? And I think part of and so the way that I talk about it now is that the practice of meditation begins
Mhm.
noticing each breath. The practice of mindfulness begins with noticing change. The practice of gratitude begins with noticing good. What you're training your brain to do is bring awareness to your noticing. Because, and to me, the poet Mary Oliver says it best, attention is the beginning of devotion. And so what
Mm.
we're paying attention to is what we're actually devoting ourselves to in our
So
lives.
Mary Oliver, she's this poet who she just goes out onto hillsides and meadows, and she'll notice the tiniest insect, the most fleeting moment, and she'll see a universe in that moment. She was such a genius at that process, and she's so important to Episcopalians. Love their Mary Oliver because it's a constant. She constantly reminds us of that. I mean, making good visible. I love that expression, making good visible. And I'm so struck by this idea that if we don't, we lose moment after moment of the richness that's all around us. And it's like we're in a car driving too fast and it's just a blur, right?
And that's
When,
it is we make invisible what we take for granted. And so
that's the negative way to say it, right?
negative framing. And so part of it is in any given moment, there's a richness and beauty that's possible. And this is
Oh, in any given moment, are you willing to stand by that?
if you think about the breath,
Mhm.
the ability for us to take a breath is a miracle.
It's a miracle.
We literally, there are places on our planet that if we walk to the top of that mountain, there would be no oxygen. And so
Mhm.
there's actually only a fairly thin layer of air on this planet. And it's the only one that we're aware of in our solar system that actually has air. And
Yeah,
so
air is a miracle.
air is a miracle. And the fact that we take
Mhm.
a breath and give a breath, and that's what actually gives us life. And that's, and the Latin for spiritual is spiritus, which means to breathe. So when you say that I am spiritual,
You're
it's
breathing. And I've always felt so strongly that that God is as close to us as just the every breath that we take is um, divine. So the silent retreat, that your painstaking process of learning to meditate um, were ways that it seems to me that you could push out that sort of speeding car life, and try in your own life to feel the moments, and then to feel them, to recognize them, and then to by appreciating them, um, solidifying it somehow.
well, that's, you know, it was probably like 2 years ago. So
Mhm.
before, I started practicing gratitude, being an impatient human being, I'd be quick to anger, for example.
Were you
Oh yeah, and it's
really?
because willpower is a finite resource, and so if you're dedicating all your energy to something, you're depleting your energy. And so I started practicing gratitude on a daily basis, and this was now probably 2 years ago. But I was angry with my oldest daughter, and I yelled at her, and she said,
Mhm.
"You're angry, and you're building a gratitude app, right?" And I was like, "Ooh, that took it."
Wow. Yeah, you opened yourself up for that one.
And the next day, I said, honey, yes, I was angry with you, but I feel like I'm way slower to anger than I've ever been in my life." And she took that. And the next day, she came up to me and she said, "You know what, Dad? You actually are more patient." And so, what the monk on the mountain said to me, which is, "That's your burden to carry," I was actually able to put that burden down. And so, to me, it's living proof in my life that it's
Mhm.
not just sort of an abstract idea. And I think partly why people feel like going to church or going to the gym is an obligation is because they're actually not feeling the impact in their lives. Because if they truly felt the impact in their lives, they would keep doing it. And it's easier in some way
Mhm.
to not take responsibility and to say it's somebody else's problem than to say, what do I really want to do? And that I actually have the ability to go do it.
So more agency. Speaking of which, you speaking of that agency and also your experiences with spiritual practices. I know that recently you went on a maybe a week-long fast.
Yep.
Now that must have been a real exercise in patience. I don't know if I could ever do that. Can you tell us what happened and how it worked? And
Yeah.
did you lose your patience with your family during that time period?
Well, you definitely tested all of us.
Mhm,
But part of it was when I was in college, I had slept on the steps of my school administration building and did a hunger fast in support of immigration and affirmative action issues, which were hot issues in California.
mhm,
And I did a 3-day hunger fast in solidarity for hunger strikers who were fighting
mhm,
for sovereignty. And in this moment, I didn't feel that I could go out and protest. I've got
mhm.
2 grandmothers, 2 daughters. We're not going to the grocery store. And so
Mhm.
I wanted to acknowledge the protesting that is happening and do my part. And I felt like the best way that I could do that was by going inward and not outward. And that I was going to create the sort of spiritual space for the healing and the reconciliation um, that we need in this moment.
So was your fasting a protest?
It was my way to acknowledge that things need to be different. And I think part of what fasting and meditation does is you disrupt the things that you so easily take for granted. And in doing so, you become more aware of all that is possible. But it also is a practice and it takes a discipline to do it. And I wanted to sort of see if I could do it for 7 days, which I hadn't ever done before. I
And
went
what happened? Did you make it?
So I went 4 days, with no food, and then the last 3 days, in order to be a reasonable husband and father, I had 1 meal a day, uh,
Mhm.
and then I married that with 2 to 3 hours of meditation each day, and it was amazing. I mean, I had experiences that I've never had before in terms of meditation and like you talk about having a relationship to an experience, and I mean I felt like I had uh, lasers shooting out of my forehead. I mean it was an amazing experience.
Did you write down what was happening to you? How did you sort of interact with your experience?
Well, I chose not to because I wanted to be in the moment, and it wasn't actually about documenting it for some kind of historical purpose. It was like truly
Mhm,
just be as present as possible.
mhm,
and the grounding of it. And I think that part of um, any of these practices is that you have
Mhm.
to deconstruct other people's expectations of what exists and actually
Mhm.
find your own truth. And that's really for me was okay, how willing am I to be present in this moment and to let go of my own expectations of what I want? Right? And that's part of the challenge is that we all have egos,
Mhm.
and the ego is either inflated or deflated. Neither is good.
Mhm.
Part of what the spiritual exercise is to actually get past the ego. And so it's neither inflated nor deflated. And for me, it was about the dissolution of it, right? So you're not, we're a lot of us who are active, we are trying to solve problems. And, if you're a hammer, everything's a nail. And this was sort of realizing that I'm not trying to solve something, I'm trying to dissolve it. And if you're trying to create new ways of being in the world, you actually have to let go of a lot.
That's so interesting. Recently we were on a phone call, all of the priests in LA with our bishop, and he was saying to us, now's the time to haul out of your heart and your memory every crazy idea you ever had and thought it couldn't work, it wouldn't be possible. Bring them out, bring them out now. Just again, back to this pause. We're as church, for instance, we're continuing, of course, live streaming and beautiful videos and all the different ways that we connect. And at the same time, the traditional church as we know it is in a pause. And so I think that for us as Christians, it's a chance to to have space to think about what is God calling us to be and do in such a time as this, right now. Um, what's the message? And usually I think we're so busy, you know not right now, God, I'm sorry, we're busy doing church. I can't listen to you right now. I got a sermon to write. We're all sort of, again, so in our lives. But the power of just stopping and and reducing all of the um, stimulation that comes, um, and reflecting individually and together on how are we being called. Now you are showing us tonight that you can go very deeply into these questions with these spiritual practices of of fasting and silent retreat and meditation. But I think you are also someone who teaches us that these gratitude exercises, and friends, you can go back and watch all the different segments that Omar has done on this. These are 5 and 10 minute techniques for changing the way that we think and opening ourselves up to, I think, a whole lot of new ideas.
I think if we want to be in the world in a different way, then we actually have to let go of what we think we know. And I think part of it too is, and I want to make sure that this is clear, is to give yourself a tremendous amount of self compassion. That it's so easy to judge what is right, what is wrong. And self compassion is a great reminder that we're just learning. There isn't really a right or wrong. We will make mistakes. And I think it's better to assume we will make mistakes. And it's okay. And
Mhm.
it's really about,
People hate to make mistakes, though. People hate to make mistakes.
well, but the reality is that not making a mistake is a mistake. And,
Right. Well said.
it's not about even managing. I used to be in private equity and finance, and we call it calculated risk. Your job is, and that's part of, again, gratitude is we've been given this life. what are we going to do with it? We've been given this opportunity to breathe. We've been given this opportunity to live. And what are we going to do with it?
So what are you grateful for?
Well, I'm certainly grateful that you have been so generous in creating the space for this to happen. I think part of the challenge of churches is that they do have a lot of traditions, and traditions can provide a tremendous amount of stability and a sense of security, but they can also then be limiting, because then you're just oftentimes following ritual and
Mhm.
lose in some ways the intention behind it, and it becomes about holding the institution up as opposed to how we each are trying to individually live. And so the fact that you've invited this opportunity to be in church in a different way, I'm grateful for.
Well,
Um,
I want to interrupt for 1 minute and just say that I think that it's very sad when our rituals just become um, what we do, unthinking, like when they lose the life that's in them. Because I think that at their best, they connect us to this long history of people searching for meaning and their ways of sort of opening up pathways to meaning and feeling more connected to God and one another. But when they become, sort of just a rote set of things that we do, that's a tragedy. So I um I'm very interested in how we can unpack them, unpack them. Even words that we use in church, I've said that before. There's just some stodgy words, you know. They're important words, but sanctification and justification and I think that there's we've got to keep the breath in it, the life in it. These spiritual practices that you've been talking about can be done in a dutiful way or in a really alive way.
and it was
Yeah, so I would like for church to be a space where we're constantly sort of um, opening things up and seeing how to make it as real as possible.
and I think that we do that by inviting new ways in, right? And that's when ritual doesn't become rigid or formulaic, but an invitation and a space to create within, and it's sort of like Shakespeare sonnet. It's got a structure, but within that structure, there's an infinite amount of creativity that's possible. And so, but if you let the structure overrule the creativity,
Yeah.
then that's when it becomes rigid. And I think,
Well, here's a good example. Take baptism. That the whole service of baptism, if you spent some time sort of opening up all those drawers and really trying to think about what in the world is happening in this moment. We're plunging into deep water and we're dying and we're getting bored. It's cool. It's amazing. But baptism, sometimes it can seem a little just a thing you do in church. And so I think that these rituals have a lot of a deep power that can be um, uh, rediscovered. Any rituals can tip over into what's a word for a ritual that loses its power? Just
formula,
yeah.
and I think, part of it is, I know for me, actually, one of the moments was sitting in church, and this was again 5-6 years ago, and hearing Galatians 5. The fruit of the Spirit is joy, kindness, love, forbearance, And I was like, yeah, I want all that. How do I?
Where do I sign up?
And realizing that if you want the fruit of the Spirit, it is these practices, like these practices, whether it's meditation or mindfulness or gratitude or prayer, but it's a practice, right? And I think that's the part that we can forget so easily, is that we want to say, okay, if I just check the box, will I get the fruit? No,
Mhm.
it's not a convenience store. This is a farm. Plant the seed, you've got to water it, you've got to till it, and then you get to reap the rewards of it. This isn't about going to the ready-made section of a grocery store and just kind of
Mhm.
picking what you want. This is work.
So this is, I think you're leaving us with a really beautiful invitation. I won't say a challenge, I'll just say an invitation in this in between time where so many, not all, but so many people are living now. A time when we're afraid for the health of our loved ones and for our own health, and when we're um, um, compelled by the sort of national and global reckoning around race. So much is going on out there, and yet we're in these our spaces, our cells, like a monk's cell, and there's so much opportunity in this time.
So I've just been reading Krishnamurti as part of my kind of fast and meditation. And he talks about these practices as opening the window. You
Mm,
control the breeze of God,
I like that.
spiritual connection is for you. But
Hmm.
all you can do is just open the window. And so when we look at these rituals or these practices as just our way of opening the window, then we are inviting something to come into our lives. And we're not forcing it, we're not expecting it. This is not um, something that we are controlling. Uh,
Right.
we are creating the space for that breeze to come in.
Mm. And again, remember, friends, that you can just right on the website, you can find where these different sessions with Omar live, and you can go back and sort of work through them with him. I want to thank you so much. We are blessed. I'm still not sure how that relates to sacrifice with blood. we're still we're so blessed that you are part of the St. James family, and that Kim and the girls are part of St. James. And I'm so grateful to you for the journey that you're sharing with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Kate. It's a delight and honor to be part of this family.
Amen. Good night. Thank you. Bye, everyone.